Okay, in this lesson, we're now ready to begin increasing the quality of our shadows and also start to make some final adjustments on a few of the materials. Alright, so let's get started with the actual fish itself. You can see that that is one of the objects in our scene that we have not had a chance to apply any kind of materials to. So in this case, we can just simply apply a basic MIA material X. There we go. So let's come in now and just simply plug in the fish color map. There we go. So we use the fish body color. There we are. Now let's take a look at this MIA material and just start to make a few minor adjustments to this. You can see on the reflectivity that right now it is set to a fairly high value, so let's really start to bring this down, as well as bring the glossiness way down, so that way this fish isn't too terribly shiny. You can maybe start to increase the glossiness a little bit, just so that it still does have a little bit of a shiny look to it, because it is going to be a fish that's pretty much straight out of the water. So let's also come in and start to give this a little bit of a normal map. Here we go. So let's come over here, back to the Maya nodes. We'll drop in our file that we'll use to contain our normal map. Let's come over and plug in the fish normal. There we are. And just like with the other materials that we've used up to this point, all we have to do is take this middle click and just connect it into either the standard or the overall bump. It really doesn't matter which one you choose. And then we'll make sure that this is set to use a tangent space normal map, because that's what this particular map is. Alright, excellent. Okay, and you can see now how that will start to give this fish now just a little bit of color. Now, one of the things I want to focus on in this lesson is improving the actual quality of our light shadows. So let's back the camera out a little bit, and if we need to, we can always come over to the outliner, or the hypershade for that matter, and start to select these different lights. What we want to do is take a look inside the ray trace shadow attributes. Now, we could, if we were using a mental ray light, adjust the lights through the actual area light attribute, although these particular lights don't have those. So what we'll have to do instead is rely on the light radius. So with the light radius, the higher the value, the more blurry and diffuse these shadows will become. With the shadow rays, that will increase the number of samples that are used to actually generate these. So as we start to make these shadows a little bit blurrier, in order to avoid having a lot of noise and just a lot of grain in these shadows, we're going to want to make sure that we have the number of shadow rays increased to a fairly high level. So we'll do this to all three of our lights. With this directional light, we'll keep the light angle a little bit tighter, just so that way we can get a little bit more of a direct sunlight type of appearance. But we'll also keep the shadow rays up at around 10. And on this backlight for the light radius, again, we'll try a value of about 5 with about 10 shadow rays. Okay, so let's take a look and enable the resolution gauge just so that we can make sure that we do get what we need in the frame. There we go, and let's see what this gives us. Alright, very good. And now you can start to see how the shadows are going to be much, much softer and much more diffuse if you compare what we have now to what we had before with these really, really harsh shadowed effects. Okay, so that will now pretty much wrap us up as far as these lights go. I really kind of like where these lights are going, and I think this is probably a pretty suitable value that we have set up right now. So let's go in and just start to bump up the render quality now. So in Maya 2009, this will be found under the Quality tab. We'll give this just a moment to load up here. And let's start by taking the sample levels and begin bumping this up. We'll leave this set to in adaptive sampling mode, which will let us set the maximum sample to 2, and that will automatically set the minimum sample to 0. So that'll now start to help eliminate a lot of these jagged anti-aliasing edges that we need to get rid of. Alright, and now you can start to see how that will really start to eliminate a lot of these noisy, kind of speckled areas that we had before. That becomes especially apparent in the legs. Although you can see, even with the anti-aliasing level set up to a fairly high value, that we do still have a lot of these kind of noisy, speckled results in the subsurface portion of the shader. So let's take a look at actually just increasing the quality of that. So let's find the subsurface shader for the skin. There we go. And let's start by taking a look at the algorithm control, or rather the light map, which is just up above that. And you can see right now the samples by default is set to a value of about 64. So let's switch that up to about 256 levels of sample. We'll save this for comparison, and that should start to help eliminate a lot of this kind of noisy result that we had in the backscatter result. And now that starts to give us a much, much cleaner subsurface result compared to what we had before. So this is what we had before, and this is what we get now with a higher subsurface sampling. Alright, overall this is starting to now look much, much better. So before we wrap up with this lesson, let's take just a moment to get this scene framed up a little bit better in the camera. So once you start to get up a little bit closer to this particular character, you'll start to notice that we do start to get some perspective warping, especially in this area around the arms and around the legs as well. You can see how the legs appear to be very, very long once they're close to the camera. Even though once you back the camera out, you can see that they're not terribly long. So an easy way to kind of alleviate this problem and get over this focal kind of distortion is to start by taking the camera a little bit further back. And then instead of dollying the camera in and out, what we'll do is use the zoom. So what this will do is leave the camera at its current position, but it'll just act like a telephoto lens and just zoom the lens in a little bit closer. So you can see now how that really does a good job of eliminating a lot of that distortion that we had in the image itself. Alright, excellent. Now we can also use something like the roll tool if we want to be able to roll the camera around and start to frame this up a little bit nicer. There we go. So something like that. Now one of the things I do want to try to call a little bit more attention to is this fish. You can see right now, if the camera is angled a little bit more to this side, you can see how the fish and the squid are actually looking at each other. But from this camera angle that we kind of want to try to achieve, you really can't see that interaction between the two. So let's just take the fish and the eyeball and we'll group those together. We'll go to Modify, Center Pivot. So that way we can rotate this around and just try to get from this particular angle a little bit better interaction between these two. There we go. And now you can start to see them looking at each other a little bit better. There we go. Much better. Now once we have this set up, I'm just going to ungroup these. So Edit, Ungroup. So that way I don't wind up with really any groups contained inside my outliner. The reason I want to do this is because whenever it comes time in our next lesson to start to set up things like render layers don't always work together whenever you're using groups which may or may not have certain objects contained inside of them. So for still images, I find it to be a little bit easier and a little bit less of a headache to work with anything that doesn't have any sort of a group connected to it. So let's just take a look at what we have now. There we go, and now you can see that overall this is now just a little bit better framed. You can start to see now a little bit more of this interaction between the fish and the squid, and it looks good from this angle, although from any other angle you could probably see that the line of sight between these two different eyes are off just a little bit, but that's okay because this really is going to be just a still image, and this is the only angle that we're really going to see it at. Okay, so now that we have this set up, we're pretty much ready to go as far as this particular render is concerned. So what we'll start to do in the next lesson is begin the process of setting up some additional render passes for things like shadow and depth of field. And then we'll be able to render all these different things out separately and then bring them all back together in order to have a very, very high level of control over the final render. So we'll start that process of setting up our different render layers in the next lesson.